Hello, my little rainclouds. I was thinking that it might be nice to do another little ramble audio while I colour in. So, I have another picture here. It is like a little nomadic looking camp, I guess, maybe a camp of refugees, because there's a bunch of people with tents and camels and stuff by a river. And then over the hills, there is like a big cartoony kind of smoke cloud, I guess, where it looks like there are people fighting. There's like spears and I think wheels and like horses, so maybe like chariots or something, just kind of poking out of this big dust cloud. So I guess, maybe there's like a camp of people that are like running away from the war or something. A lot of people have their arms raised. I don't know if they're like calling out or like making a fuss about it, or who knows, maybe they're surrendering, but I'm guessing that they're refugees. I have no idea where it is. I have no idea what army it is, but we'll figure it out, I guess. We'll make our own story for it. Okay, what are we going to start off with? Let's start off with the palm tree, I guess. As always, we're just going to pick a random brown and hope that it looks okay. Yeah, that looks fine. That's pretty good, actually. So what I wanted to talk about was counselling. Because I've been doing a counselling course. I finished my first trimester. And it's pretty great. I like it. So I wanted to talk about counselling while I colour in some stuff and just kind of ramble on. Because I could talk for a long time about counselling. I've certainly learned a lot about it, but I kind of feel like it's a bit of an intimidating topic, one that I want to do justice. There's perfectionist tendencies there, so I figured let's just do a ramble instead, and hopefully that'll be nice. So what is counselling? Counselling is a special kind of relationship between two or more people where one of them is aiming to help the other, and particularly wanting to help them cope with mental illness, life issues, things like that. And typically the way that happens is by talking through stuff. People often think that they come to counselling for advice, but as counsellors, we're not really meant to give advice to people. It doesn't really work very well. And typically people already know what they need to do, but they may not be conscious of it, or they may need help kind of working through the process of it. So they might come initially wanting advice or wanting an opinion on it. But honestly, they get that from everyone else in their life already, you know, unless it's like a topic that you don't feel comfortable talking about to anyone. But even then, you don't really need advice, typically. What you need is a space to kind of unpack stuff and talk it through. And that's kind of the big difference between, other kinds of relationships and the relationship between a counsellor and a client. We use the term client instead of patient. It tends to have a lot of stigma around it. It makes it seem like there's something very wrong with someone if they're a patient, I think. But also just, it's a bit more respectful, and there's kind of an intent to to dismantle the idea that the counsellor is the expert, because they're not. The client is the expert. The client knows way more about themselves and their life than the counsellor ever will. So, we call them a client instead. And it's more of an equal partnership. Not wholly equal, I guess, but the idea is that you actually have a lot of say in things, and that you get to determine what you want to work on and where things go and the approach you want to take and all sorts of stuff like that. And the counsellor just kind of accompanies you on that journey, helps you out here and there. They're sort of a companion of sorts, and they help you to figure things out for yourself and help you to hear yourself more by mostly the counsellor just listening to you and then kind of reflecting back what you've said. That's kind of the big deal. Counsellors can't change people. Nobody can change anyone except themselves. And so the counselling relationship is really more about reflection. The counsellor is kind of a mirror to the client. You wake up in the morning and you have a feeling that you don't look great, but you don't really know what's up. So you go to the mirror and you take a look. You go, I don't really like the way that my hair is, or I've got a bit of a spot there, or I've got bags under my eyes, or whatever. The mirror can't change that for you. You have to change it. But the mirror can help you by figuring out what you want to change and whether or not those changes are working or not. And you might need to adjust them based on the feedback that you get from the mirror. So that's kind of the important viewpoint shift. Because a lot of people think that they come to a counsellor and the counsellor's going to fix things for them. And the counsellor's going to give them advice and tell them what to do, and that things will be magically better when they follow that advice, and that's not really how it works. So, that's an important thing to drill into people's heads. We've done the palm tree. Let's give this little guy some orange robes. You typically, as a counsellor, a lot of it is just about listening, really. Particularly in the early stages of things, because people need to get their story out. They need to tell their story, and they don't often really get to do that. A lot of the time, we don't really get to talk as much as we need to. I think that people really do need to talk. Certainly, I do, which is why I do things like this, where I'm just rambling on and on. But, I think that a lot of people are very verbal. I certainly am. And language is quite a verbal thing. And we express ourselves through language. We formulate thoughts that adhere to a kind of language. And we need to express those thoughts. And in so doing, we kind of challenge and clarify the way that we think about things. Because I think a lot of the time we have these sort of like reasonably unformed thoughts. They're just sort of vague conceptions about how we think or feel about something, but we don't really verbalize it and say it clearly and figure out, that's where I stand. Or it's not quite like this, it's more like that. And that's an important thing. And I've certainly noticed that a lot of people, they benefit a lot from just talking about stuff. And it's kind of a rarity, really. They don't get to do it in their life as much as they'd like to. And it's an interesting thing. Like you find that a lot of sex workers will say that most of their clients just want to talk. And I think that's true. Like, certainly, there are some people who want to like have sex, but I think a lot of people really just want someone who listens and who will care. And hopefully has a sense of like intimacy with them and stuff too. But I think a lot of it is just sort of finding someone that you can make yourself a bit vulnerable with, and that you can just talk about stuff. Talking helps a lot. Like, even if nothing happens about your problem, even if there's no change at all, just talking about stuff is really helpful. So, I think that that's a big thing that people need. And we tend to think that we're good listeners when really we're not good listeners. And typically in conversations, certainly in arguments, a lot of the time people don't really listen to each other, and they're just kind of like waiting until they can say the next thing that they want to say, which is unfortunate because we miss a lot when we don't listen to people. And sometimes those things are pretty important, and it really helps if you feel heard, which people probably don't often feel heard. And so things can tend to kind of spiral, and you get into arguments and miscommunication and all that kind of thing. And eventually people kind of lash out at each other, and they might say something really hurtful, or they might really raise their voice or make a big fuss about something, or they'll act out in some sort of way in order to be heard, in order to really finally be listened to. And that's not great. So if you could just talk about stuff, then I think that's a much healthier approach towards things. So I think talking is very important, and is not something that we typically do very much. And so one of the big things that I've learned in counselling training is active listening. That's the big sort of toolbox that we use, these counselling microskills, where we talk about all these different skills you can use to make people feel heard and to help you listen to things. And one of the big perks about listening to someone and reflecting that back, communicating that back to the person that's talking, is that they can listen to themselves too. And that's very, very important, and also something that we don't tend to do. We don't really listen to other people very much, and we also don't listen to ourselves very much. And that is a shame, because things tend to go a lot better if we start listening to ourselves. Like really a lot better. So that's another really helpful aspect of counseling, is by having someone who does listen to you, you can then get that sense of self-understanding, of self-knowledge, and from that comes wisdom. And that's really important, and it's not something that tends to happen a lot in everyday life. So coming to a counsellor can really help you to get in touch with yourself and the kind of things that you think and the kind of things that you say. And that's important, particularly as the way that you say something can really make a difference on how you feel about it and how you think about it. So the words that you use, the specific words, it can be very, very interesting and very, very insightful if you listen to the specific way that someone says something, not just what they say, but how they say it. So that's really interesting. But I've certainly found that just listening to people, just some of these really simple techniques are very, very helpful. Certainly as someone who used to take a much more active role in trying to help people, you want to swoop in, you want to be the superhero, the savior, the messiah. You want to rescue people. You want to give them advice. You want to help them. You want to fix their problems. You want to do all of this. And you can't. It's just not how things work. People need to change a lot of the time, and you cannot do that. Only they can change themselves. But also, a lot of the time, people have the tools that they need in order to reach answers, to reach conclusions, to understand things better, to solve problems, to know what they need to do. They may not have access to those things just yet, but typically they already have, the medical kit, the first aid kit. They already have that. You don't need to be the paramedic swooping in and saving things with a fully stocked first aid kit. What they need is just a clear table, just a flat surface so that they can unpack their first aid kit and start using it. A lot of the time we've got a lot of stuff up in our heads and we just haven't really worked through it. we haven't really taken stuff apart. We haven't looked at things, assessing whether it's true or not, assessing whether we still need things, assessing how we feel about things, about what we want, all of this sort of stuff. And they just need some space to really open up about stuff and look through it. So that's a big part of what counselling is just giving them that space to do that and sort of prompting them through it, walking them through it, helping them realize things, helping them listen to themselves more in order to get more in touch with that. But certainly some people don't know certain things and they might need some training or some skills or some knowledge, something that's often called psychoeducation, teaching them about how brains work, about how thoughts work, feelings, the different kinds of behavioral patterns that can take place, and how trauma works and all that sort of stuff. But a lot of the time, people just need a space to sort of unpack stuff and figure it out, and then they'll be okay. That was one of the big revelations really about counseling, is just do less. just don't get in the way. Take your ego out of the equation, which is the tough thing, because we want to swoop in and be the superhero, but it's not really what people need. And often it's counterproductive. It doesn't help them, and in fact can actively hinder them, because then they get dependent on you to solve all their problems, which is a big problem. If someone comes to you and you give them advice, then either they take that advice and it works, in which case they'll become dependent on you to solve all their other problems, and they won't internalize that success. They won't think, oh, I'm capable of solving my own problems. They'll think, oh, wow, that counselor's really great, or that friend's really great, or whatever, and now I'll come to them with all my problems. Or they take your advice and it doesn't work, and then they think that you're garbage, and then they may not come back, or they may blame you for the problem, and that's not great either. But also, a lot of the time when you give people advice, they won't take it. Sometimes they'll do the exact opposite, which is not great. So just having that perspective on things and going, you know what, I don't really think that it's going to help you if I tell you what to do. Also knowing the limitations of things, where you might think that you have the right answer, and it might be the right answer for you, but it might not work for them. It might not apply to their situation. That might not be how they work. That may not work with their life at all. And so you need to be aware of that too. But people are capable of finding their own solutions almost always. And it's really just about helping them get there and helping them figure out what works for them. And, you can have the best advice in the world, but often people aren't ready to take it yet. Like if you went back in time and you gave yourself 5 years ago, you gave yourself some advice, would you take it? Probably not. If you were like, hey, don't do this thing, you'd probably be like, yeah, all right, fine. And then you go off and do that thing. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you would take that advice. But I think a lot of the time we're not ready to take that advice, to make changes, to make that kind of decision. And so we'd often probably just make the same mistake anyway, which sucks. But we need to reach a point where we are ready to make that change, or when we have learned that lesson ourselves, things like that. So you can sometimes lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. And that's important. That's important to come to terms with, particularly for a professional counselor. If you're going to be a counselor, I think you have to embrace the idea that you're not going to be saving people and fixing them yourself. You're just kind of enabling people to hopefully do that. Getting some nice coloured robes here. Getting some purple in here as well. So people really just need to be heard. They need to tell you their story so that you're on board with things. But also it's a cathartic kind of thing to express to yourself and to share your life with someone else, and to recap it for yourself as well, so that you understand you and your life and how you think about things and what your troubles are and all of that kind of thing. So having that ability to just talk for, an hour and then maybe leaving and then coming back next week and talking for another hour, and just being able to talk as much as you want about anything you want and not having to worry about the other person's needs, which is a big one. Because often when we get into conversations, we have to balance other people's needs. But in counselling, you pay me, you pay the counsellor so that you don't have to worry about their needs, so that you don't have to worry about, praising them. You don't need to worry about making them feel good. You don't need to worry about giving them equal time or having them feel heard and all that kind of stuff. And instead, you take care of their needs in one specific way, which is to pay them their fee so that they can buy groceries and live and eat. And then you can just talk about you and you don't need to worry about them. And the counsellor removes their ego from the situation, and they're not making it about them. They don't get into some contest with you about who has it worse. They're not spouting little platitudes at you. They're not, trying to make you feel bad about something that you did to them or anything like that. It's not about them. Instead, it's just all about you. And you can talk about whatever you want. And you can talk about your deepest, darkest secrets. And then you can just leave. And if you want, you never have to see that person again. But you can also just come, once a week or a couple times a month and talk about stuff, and then not have them in your day-to-day life, which is very important because you typically would not feel comfortable revealing that kind of stuff to a friend or a partner or a family member. But this person's job is specifically just to deal with that stuff in your life and then not interact with you. If you bump into them at the movies or something, some people might be okay with saying hello, but usually that's kind of the end of it. But you can very well pretend that that person does not exist outside of your therapy appointment, which is kind of nice. It's a way of compartmentalizing. It's a way of just keeping things a bit separate so that you have the ability to unpack things in a safe space. And you don't need to worry about consequences. You don't need to worry about judgment. It's very important to be non-judgmental as a counsellor and just kind of accept them, not giving them, positive or negative judgments really, but just accepting, just listening and acknowledging how they feel. And that's really great. So people just need to be heard a lot of the time, and that's a very valuable thing. And just that alone could be quite therapeutic. And just having their thoughts, their feelings heard and validated. It's really big. It's really important. But there is obviously more to therapy than just that. And so I thought I would talk a little bit about the four major conditions, the four sort of required qualities of a counsellor. And those are in large part influenced by a guy called Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was a very, very cool guy. He is sort of the pioneer, if you like, of what is called person-centered therapy, which is kind of the basis of all modern-day therapeutic approaches. Not necessarily in terms of the theory element of it, but in terms of how we treat the client, how people interact with each other, the atmosphere of things. That's kind of a big thing. And so Carl Rogers set forth these kind of principles that people sort of took and expanded upon. But the four major things that counselors need to show, to demonstrate to their clients is accurate empathy. That's a big one. So that in itself is probably a pretty big topic. A lot of people have a sort of warped idea of what empathy is. Empathy is not it's not about feeling what the other person feels. We often sort of see that and have that view of things, which it's not pleasant. Like the idea of if someone else is sad and then that makes you feel sad, or someone else is angry and you start feeling really angry, we may sort of think that that's like a very empathic thing, but that's not really very helpful, because it's kind of taking the other person's problem or the other person's pain and making it about you. If someone else is sad and then you're also feeling sad, then you're like, oh, I don't want to feel sad. I got to stop feeling sad. I got to do whatever it takes to stop feeling sad, which might be like cheering the person up, but it might be other stuff too. So that's not great. So instead, empathy, in terms of counselling at least, is about recognizing what the other person is feeling, acknowledging what they are feeling, and potentially communicating back to them what they are feeling. So if someone's feeling sad, then saying, oh, it looks like you're feeling sad. And they can say, yeah, I am. Or no, I'm not actually, I'm kind of angry. Whatever it is. But just acknowledging how they're feeling and witnessing that and accepting that and showing them, I see how you're feeling, but not feeling it yourself. That's not really helpful. Often it's quite counterproductive. So that is what we sort of consider to be empathy. And the idea of accurate empathy is understanding not just the feeling, but also what that means in context of the client and their life, and sort of understanding what that means to them. So, for example, someone might say, I'm pregnant, or my partner's pregnant, and most people might go, oh yay, congratulations, that's really great. But that person may not feel that way. And they might be like, what are you talking about? This is terrible. I'm not ready to have a kid yet. My dad's going to kill me. This is terrible. So they may feel very differently. And it's important to understand how someone is feeling and not just make assumptions about it, but sort of tie that in and accurately perceive and understand their feelings. And when you do that, you make them feel heard and you make them feel understood and valued, and you help to demonstrate to them what they're feeling, so they can go, oh, okay, yeah, I'm feeling angry about this, or I am feeling jealous, or yeah, I am excited about this, whatever it is. So that's important. That's one of the four. Another one is unconditional positive regard. This is very important. Unconditional positive regard means that you demonstrate an acceptance of the person, that you have this attitude towards them where you are not judging them for their negative qualities, for the temporary setbacks that they might be experiencing, for their past. It's about understanding that people are flawed and that they can struggle with things, but not judging them for that and seeing them for their potential instead. Kind of, acknowledging that they may have flaws and that they do have flaws, and that they may be struggling with things, and that there may be aspects of people and their situations that can be unattractive or unflattering, negative, but not judging them for that or seeing them just for that, seeing them for their potential and treating them with respect and kindness and helping them to see themselves in that way, seeing them as a person who is deserving of respect and compassion and kindness and good things. That's really important. It's kind of a big, broad concept, and there's probably a lot more that I could say about that. But I think it's a very important skill, an important standpoint of a sort of philosophical approach, I guess. And I found that that's something that I quite naturally kind of exhibit. That's something that I've already been doing in my audios. The idea of acknowledging people that may consider themselves to be broken or whatever, and being like, yeah, you have had a hard time, and that's okay, but you are absolutely able to overcome that. There's the potential for so much good in you. You deserve those things. Wanting to help them get there, and letting them express things that may not be conventionally acceptable or attractive, that other people may judge them for, and just being like, yeah, okay, so that's how you feel, that's okay, let's talk through that, rather than going like, ugh, why do you feel that? That's wrong, gross, get out of my office. So that's an important one, certainly, unconditional positive regard. And another one that is a bit similar is called non-possessive warmth. And non-possessive warmth involves having a warm, affectionate, kind of loving attitude towards that person, but not needing them to be in your life, not needing them to be your friend or your lover or your family member or anything like that, and accepting that they may just see you an hour a week or an hour a month or whatever, and eventually they will leave your life. Eventually you will stop seeing them. And that's okay. And accepting that there is going to be a kind of distance, and there are going to be professional boundaries between you, and that there is going to be a limit to the kind of relationship that you have with that person, and being okay with that. Being able to express affection and warmth and care and compassion for that person, showing them a kind of love, but doing so with that kind of safe distance and attachment at the same time. And that's a tricky thing, but I think also something that I've kind of been exhibiting in my audio, something that I've already been able to do by, feeling that kind of fondness for people in a general sense, but not needing them to be part of my everyday life. So I think all three of those criteria, accurate empathy, non-possessive warmth, and unconditional positive regard, are things that come quite naturally to me. But there is a fourth one, and that is one that we've actually already talked about last time I did a colouring in video, but that is the one that I kind of struggled with the most, and that is congruence. Congruence means being yourself, being sort of natural and authentic and genuine, being real, being present, not having a mask on or playing a character, having a persona, pretending to be the all-knowing therapist or the wise man or something like that, and instead just being yourself, being an approachable, real person who has flaws, who has issues, and acknowledging that, presenting your real self and being the kind of person that you would be in any situation. I mean, yeah, you probably speak differently to your friends than you do to your mother or whatever. So obviously we present different sides of ourselves to different people in different contexts. But in general, just trying to be genuine. And as someone who didn't really like myself initially, and someone who had some tendencies to be an actor and sort of portray myself in a different way, that can be kind of tricky. That can be kind of difficult. So that was one that I sort of found a bit difficult initially, but I'm becoming a lot better at that thing, and I think that it's because of all sorts of different factors, but I think a big one is I like myself more now. I'm more comfortable with myself, and that's really nice. So I think that's probably the one that I struggled with the most in the past, but is something that I'm doing a lot better at now, and I feel good about that. I think that particularly I had a a workshop or two that I went to for my course, and you get to go there and meet other people, and you get to practice being a counsellor and talking through things with people and practicing your listening skills to them and all that sort of thing. And that was really nice, and it was a really refreshing kind of experience of seeing like, oh, actually, I'm not the person I used to be. I'm quite different now, and things are very different, and I don't have to be the way that I was, and updating my self-image and things like that. And that was really lovely, and I think that was a big that played a big part in embracing the idea of congruence. So those are the 4 criteria. Those are the 4 of the big things that kind of set the scene and create this this therapeutic climate, as Carl Rogers called it, that helps people to change, to grow, to reach a point of self-actualization. Carl Rogers was of the belief that people have an innate tendency to strive towards self-actualization when the conditions are right, and that exhibiting those traits is how you make the conditions right for self-actualization. Many people disagree with him, or don't necessarily, agree with that philosophy of people's innate tendency towards self-actualization, towards growing and learning and bettering themselves. I'm not quite sure about it. I don't know that people have an innate tendency towards it, but I certainly think that we can encourage people to get to that point by making the right kind of conditions and climate. And I think that it really does help to exhibit those things. But I don't think that it's enough just to do those things. And that's kind of where the counselling microskills come in. Active listening and all that, helping people to explore things, and those were big things that Carl Rogers was also a big proponent of. He sort of popularized, I guess, these forms of active listening. Certainly didn't come up with all of them, but he kind of distilled down what listening, what good listening is, and used that as a reference point and a way of teaching people how to be better active listeners and how to engage with their clients. And that's really important. So active listening is very different from just regular listening. Regular listening, I think we tend to think of as being very passive, whereas active listening, you're actively doing things rather than just sitting there taking in information, which might not really be happening. You might just be sitting there while words bounce off of you. But instead, active listening, it involves a lot more activity. It involves you making noises and, moving and using facial expressions and body language and things like that. It involves you repeating back what people have said to you sometimes in different ways. And those things are really important. So let's go through some of the techniques, shall we? One of the simpler ones, one of the easier ones, is called verbal minimal encourages, or minimal responses, and that involves making noises like mm-hmm, uh-huh, right, okay, yep, okay. Those sorts of things. Obviously not all at once like that. You space them out. If you do it too quickly, then it can sound very aggressive, like you're not really listening and you just want the person to shut up so that you can say your piece. If you go, mm-hmm, yep, uh-huh, right, yep, that's not good. But spreading those out, it tends to be quite helpful. And one of the big things that they do is that they let the person keep talking for an extended period of time without starting to feel awkward. Because a lot of people, particularly, I think, my listeners, feel awkward about talking. A lot of people have issues with speaking for a long period of time, feeling like they're rambling. I've noticed a lot of people apologize for talking and they don't need to. But I've certainly noticed that. So providing people with the space to be able to talk through stuff and not feel awkward about that is really important. So having those little noises means that you encourage that person to keep going, keep talking to you for 5 minutes or whatever, without you actually saying much, without you having to say things. And that's important because, particularly if they're telling you their life story, you don't really need to say very much, but they will probably feel awkward if they're just talking non-stop, uninterrupted, without you making a single noise. So just doing things like that can encourage people to keep talking without you needing to interrupt them. But you can, now and then, use things like brief invitations to continue. So you can say, okay, can you tell me more about that? Or, right, okay, so talk to me more about this. And those kinds of things prompt people to continue, and typically you would space them out in between some minimal encourages. You can also do more implicit ones, so you can say like, and you're feeling worried about losing your job? Or something like that, and then they'll prompt them to talk about that thing. Counselling is typically, particularly the person-centered approach by Carl Rogers, typically seen as a non-directive thing, which means that we don't really tell people what to talk about or what to do, and just kind of let the client drive the bus, let them figure out what they want to talk about, and what rate and what time and all that kind of thing. So typically we take a non-directive approach and just kind of let them tell us what they want to talk about. But certainly some of those invitations to continue, if you talk about specific things or you mention certain topics, can be directive. And that's not necessarily bad. It's just kind of the way that you approach things. But yeah, usually you try and keep things fairly non-directive, depending on the kind of theory and the school of counselling that you use. And there's lots of different ones. But those are super simple techniques, and they help quite a bit. One of the bigger ones is reflection of content and reflection of feeling. Both kind of the same thing, but just in different areas. So if someone will tell you something, and it could be like, a paragraph or two, or it could just be like one sentence. They might just go like, yeah, I'm feeling really angry about this. And you just kind of reflect that like, yeah, you're feeling angry, right? Like my boss is being such a dick to me, and I can't seem to get anywhere. And it just, whenever I try and do something, I'm just thwarted at every turn. And to go, right, yeah, it sounds like you're feeling very frustrated. And that's reflection of feeling, right? You're just taking the feelings, whether they're explicit or implicit, and reflecting it back to them. It's really simple, but it's really, really useful, because typically when you say something like that, right, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated, they'll go, yeah, I am. And just, I've been working so hard, and I've just like, they'll just go off on it. They'll just take that little breadcrumb, and they'll just keep talking to you more. And it's really cool, how they do that. And it's great. It makes them feel understood. It makes them feel heard. It's like, yeah, you get me. You're on the same page as me, which is great. And that will help them to open up more and to talk more about stuff. And it also sort of prompts them to continue, which is great. But also it helps them to listen to themselves, because they may not realize consciously that they are angry or frustrated or sad or whatever. And so that's really helpful too, because like, especially if they have issues allowing themselves to feel certain ways, that can be really important, for them. And so you can acknowledge the way that they're feeling and normalize it as well. So that you can say like, yeah, you're feeling frustrated, and that's perfectly understandable. It's perfectly valid given what you're experiencing. So that's really good. That's a super cool technique. And the other one, so reflection of content, is similar, but instead it's like, yeah, I love that old house. It's run down and it's in crappy condition, and most people would hate the way that it looks, but I just love it. Something about it. It's really special to me. And you go, right, yeah, it sounds like your house has a lot of unusual qualities to it, but it's very important to you. You love it a lot. There's a bit of feeling in that, but not too much. But mostly you just relay the facts back, right? So I guess maybe a better example is like, I missed the bus and I got into work late, and then people were yelling at me and all of these customers just non-stop, and I never got a breath anywhere. And you could be like, yeah, it sounds like you had a really stressful day. So again, you're just taking the content of what they said, just like the story of it, and then reflecting it back to them, and then they can go, yeah, that is what happened, and they feel encouraged by that. They feel heard, which is great. And then they keep talking about it, and hopefully they can hear it. Often they won't just give you like a sentence or two like that. Often they'll be talking for a more extended period of time, and then you'll sort of reflect it back in a more succinct form. You'll kind of condense it down. But yeah, that's the principle of it. And you can reflect content and feeling at the same time, which is typically called paraphrasing. So that's kind of more of an advanced version of it, I guess, although it can be quite effective to just use the very simple reflection of feeling rather than getting all worked up into the complexities of, right, this happened and so you feel like that. You can just sort of reflect the feeling and go, yeah, it sounds like you're really angry. And that can be very powerful, very sort of concentrated and focused. But yeah, it's really cool. And also important to note that it's okay if you get it wrong. Because if you get it wrong, if you say, yeah, it sounds like you're really angry, and then they go, no, I'm not angry. It's more that I'm disappointed. And then you can go, oh, okay, right. And you still get the story, right? Like you still clarify it. And then once they've explained themselves and they feel heard, then they'll keep going and they'll talk to you about it. And if you've gotten it wrong, then they might spend a little bit more time explaining it to you. But typically, the way that you do it is to use very tentative kind of wording. So rather than just saying you're angry, you typically say something like, it sounds like you're angry, or I imagine that you're feeling angry, or things like that. And that tends to be very helpful. And they're such simple techniques, but they really are cool. I like it a lot. And it's very helpful. Even just doing that stuff, not getting into the nitty-gritty of things, not employing, counseling theories and exercises and giving them homework and making big leaps, but just hearing somebody out, just making them feel heard and understood is huge. And it can be really helpful. Like just you listening to them can mean so much and help them feel so much better about stuff. And it's super easy to do. I mean, you have to practice it because it's tough to remove your ego from things and to get out of the way and go like, oh, this is actually about them, not me. I don't need to be butting in here. I don't need to be giving them advice or telling them what they should do and blah, blah, blah. It can be tricky, certainly, but really helpful. Means a whole lot to people. This is something I've been doing a lot with my friends, with people in my life, my family and stuff, and it's really useful. And it's not like a manipulative trick or something. I'm not using like mind control on them. I'm just listening to them, just reflecting back what they're feeling and making them feel heard. And it honestly does have such a difference on the way that you interact with people, and they feel so much better talking to you. It's really great. And even if you do want to give people advice, and you can as a friend if you want, often people aren't ready to take advice initially. They need to vent a little bit. They need to feel heard and understood and work through their feelings about stuff. And then they might get ready to actually like solve it or change something. And if they are, then maybe they do need some help. Maybe they do need some advice. But even if they do need advice, they typically need to talk through their feelings first. Not all the time, but a lot of the time they do. And that is okay. It's a very healthy thing. And I tend to find that just doing that often is enough. And then maybe like asking a few questions to prompt them to reflect on something themselves, to think about how they feel about that, to consider how that might apply to someone else, or whether they have the same standards for themselves or whatever. But yeah, a lot of the time, just reflecting stuff, just listening and going, it sounds like you're feeling this, sounds like that, sounds like you've reached a decision about this already, or it sounds like this is what you want to do, but this is holding you back. And they'll just go like, yeah, it is. And then they'll just keep talking about it. And it's really interesting. It's really cool. And again, it's not manipulative. So if you see that I'm doing that to you, or if you find that someone else is doing it to you, or if you go to therapy and you notice your therapist doing it, it's totally fine. Like it's a really great thing. It's a really great technique, and you can use it yourself with people. And it works super well. It's a really cool thing. And what else? There is also the use of voice is a really interesting kind of thing. Obviously something that I'm pretty into. But just the way that you speak can mean a lot and can really affect the client and the way that they're feeling and the way that they interact with you and all that kind of stuff. And you tend to find that if you match the way that someone is speaking, the speed, the tone, the clarity of their voice, the volume of their voice, things like that, they'll tend to sort of feel a bit closer to you, and they'll kind of connect with you a bit more. They might feel a little safer with you. And also, if once you've done that, you then change the way that you speak, or indeed like your position, your posture, things like that. If you make a movement of some kind, you may find that they then match you in doing that, which is really interesting. It's called joining, when you kind of connect with someone by doing the same thing that they're doing. And again, it can kind of seem manipulative, but it's not really, and it's certainly not malicious, but just if they're coming in agitated, and so you may use your voice in a very calming way to kind of help them calm down initially, but then they might get a bit more excited about something that they're happy about, and so you might be speaking in a more sort of faster paced, more excited way when you're interacting with them, and then they may find that you're like quite sort of close to them, that they join with you. And then, for example, you might start slowing your voice down again into a transition where you're ready to sort of end the session and bring it to a halt. And yeah, just little things like that work really well. And as I was saying, posture as well. So you can match how the client is sitting, and that may facilitate some joining. And then if you then change your posture, they may also change theirs. So they might be sitting in kind of a defensive, closed kind of posture initially. And then if you match that and then change to a more open form of body language where, your legs or arms aren't crossed, things like that, then they may do that too. They may follow suit. And we tend to find that changes the way that people feel as well. So they might feel a bit more comfortable with you using open body language, which is really cool. There's often something called the handbrake technique, where if you lean forward, someone kind of talks a bit more and they might speed up and be a bit more engaged. And if you need them to kind of slow down or relax a little bit, then leaning back can make them sort of slow down and take it a bit easier, and could be a bit more contemplative rather than sort of racing through things. So that's really interesting too. And again, kind of seems a little bit manipulative maybe, but it's used in a way that tries to benefit the client. So but yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's really interesting. There's lots of really interesting things there. And yeah, using things like facial expressions and stuff too. That's a big one. So you can communicate non-verbally. If someone has said something sad, you can tilt your head to the side and make a sort of sympathetic face, and that also encourages people to keep talking, because you're sort of prompting them and showing that you're listening without saying anything necessarily, and that also promotes empathy, so it helps them to feel understood and heard because you're making the appropriate kind of gestures. Making eye contact with people is really important too. Not too much eye contact, but certainly making enough to make them feel like you are interested and that you've heard them, and things like that. So yeah, all of that's pretty important, pretty cool, and there's lots of interesting techniques that you can use. I feel like I've forgotten a whole bunch, but that's okay. We don't need to cover all of them necessarily. But another big thing is not asking too much, not asking too many questions, and just kind of letting them go at their own pace. If you do ask questions, typically trying to keep them open questions rather than closed questions. So closed questions usually just need like a yes or a no, or a couple of words as an answer, like, are you single? How many brothers do you have? Is it raining today? Things like that. Those are closed questions. Whereas like, how do you feel about this? Or what happened when you did this? Or things like that. Those are open questions, and typically they give a lot more information, and they're less directive as well. Because you can ask someone, how many brothers do you have? And they might say none, and then you dust off your hands and you're finished. But they may say, but I have 12 sisters, right? And it's quite a big thing that you might have missed. Whereas if you just ask, like, tell me a bit more about your family, or something like that, it's like, oh, actually, let me give you all this information. And that's also, it's really important, because a lot of the time people are quite used to being asked closed questions. If you go to the doctor, for example, doctors tend to ask a lot of closed questions because they're diagnosing things. They're trying to get specific kinds of information to confirm or disprove certain hypotheses. If you go to, like social services and stuff like that, tend to be sort of interrogated a bit with a lot of closed questions, and it doesn't feel great. Instead, if you're asked more open questions or less directive, and you can kind of take them and explain things as you like, it tends to feel nicer, freer. You're kind of in a bit more control. You feel a bit more valued, and that's an important thing. But not asking too many questions and just kind of letting the client take things wherever they want to go is important. And that can be very refreshing to people, because it helps them to feel like they're in control of things. It helps them to feel like they are valued, and that they are not, a specimen or a subject, and instead can be looked at through a different light that's more respectful and more considerate of them. And it's all about empowering people, right? So that's important. It's important to help people feel better about things and feel like a person who can make their own decisions, and who can pursue their own happiness, and who can solve their own problems and things like that. So that's an important thing, and it's really nice to kind of recognize the power that is there in that counseling relationship when you don't do so much. That was a big sort of lesson that I took away from the workshop, particularly, is talk less, smile more, do less. It's not about you. It doesn't need to be about you. And just sort of recognizing that it's not about me so much, and that the client is the one doing the hard work, and they're the one that's going to have to make the changes and things like that. I can encourage them. I can try and understand them and all that kind of thing. But in general, it's really just talk less, do less. It's not about you. It doesn't need to be about you. Just kind of let it happen. Don't overthink it. And yeah, that was nice. I had an assignment that I had to do where I had to record a sort of 10-minute practice session with another student, so that I could analyze it and kind of learn from it, look at what mistakes I made and what I did well and things like that. And initially, like at the start of the trimester, that was incredibly intimidating. It was not something I was looking forward to doing. And when the time came to actually do it, it was really like uneventful and kind of underwhelming. And it was just like kind of on autopilot, and I really didn't have to do that much. And I did pretty well. I made some mistakes here and there, but in general, like I did pretty well. And yeah, that was an interesting thing to kind of experience, both as a confidence booster, but also sort of a humbling moment, I guess, of just like, it's not rocket science, and I really don't have to do that much, and it's not really that much about me. So yeah, that was interesting, certainly. But just the idea of not talking too much, not dominating the conversation, and letting the client just kind of go wherever they want, and you just sort of reflecting things and helping them lead. That's a very person-centered approach. Other counselling theories are available, and they may be more focused on specific areas, and they may be more active in terms of what the counsellor does, and exercises and things that they may do with the client, or they may be looking for specific kinds of things or use certain techniques. But in general, a lot of therapy, a lot of counselling relies on that kind of approach of just reflecting and listening and helping the client to kind of explore and expand their story. And then from that, you can make connections between different things. You can challenge ideas. You can propose, alternative behaviors. You can give them, homework of different things to try. You can do all sorts of things. You can do different exercises and all that kind of stuff. But in general, having the just that foundation of active listening is huge, and it really does make a difference for a lot of people. I don't think that there's one therapeutic moment. There's no one thing that helps everyone, but I think just being heard and being listened to really helps a lot of people, and that's something that you don't tend to get in your other relationships that much, because with friendships and partnerships and family relations and stuff, there's a lot of give and take, as there should be typically, and that's okay. But yeah, certainly the idea that you need to give someone their turn to talk, and that it can't always be about your issues, and that you can't make something too central or too focused on yourself, and things like that. They prevent people from really talking about what's going on for them, and a lot of the time, people need that kind of experience. They need the ability to unpack stuff and talk stuff through, and they don't get that a lot of the time. Certainly some people do, but I think typically a lot of people, not great listeners, and people need someone to listen. Maybe not all the time, maybe not throughout the entirety of their life, but certainly if you're having a hard time with something, if you've got issues that are really making things pretty tough for you, then having someone to listen while you just unpack stuff is huge. And that's kind of one of the big powerful things of counseling, really, is just having that ability to talk through whatever you need to talk through. Oh boy, I coloured in some grass and I really don't like the way that it looks. I think I kind of screwed it up a little bit. I tried to put some yellow there to make the grass look a bit more sandy, but I don't really think they did it right. And also I kind of put the more greeny part right next to the water, which made sense in my head, but in retrospect, maybe doesn't really work that much. I don't know. Oh well, it's okay. Yeah, so I think the idea of active listening is huge, and often people really, really need to listen to themselves more, which is certainly facilitated by active listening, but they still need to be receptive to what they're saying, and they still need to be receptive to the idea that they are allowed to feel certain things or think certain things, that their feelings and thoughts are valid, that they don't need to be judged so much, because we are very judgmental people, and that's natural, and that can be good in some ways. Judgment certainly has helped us to get where we are. Friend or foe, safe or dangerous, edible or not, if someone's a mate or not, all those sorts of things. Predator or prey, those are helpful judgments. Certainly in the early days of humanity, they were very helpful judgments. But a lot of the time now, we make judgments that aren't really that helpful, and often they're based on faulty logic, and yeah, it's not fantastic. So helping people to kind of not judge themselves so much and become more accepting to what they feel, to what they think, to who they are, to what their life is like, it's all really important. And trying to make people feel accepted and not judge them yourself is a really important step in helping them to learn to judge themselves less. Obviously, some judgments are important and helpful and are healthy, but we often tend to judge ourselves way too much and way too harshly. And often it's a defense mechanism. It's trying to kind of inoculate ourselves to the negative judgments of others by judging ourselves first and judging ourselves even harsher than other people would. But it doesn't tend to work super great. Typically, it just means that we have a 100% chance of getting hurt by someone's judgments, ours. And then if someone else judges us, it doesn't really take the hurt away. And in fact, may make it even worse because it's something that we're already insecure about. But yeah, a lot of the time people are too busy judging themselves to judge us, so it's not really that important. And instead, just kind of looking at, this is how I feel, and that's okay. This is what I want, and that's okay. And not really needing that judgment, because a lot of the time it's not helpful. And often it's based on faulty logic and false inferences anyway. So yeah, just learning that is a really important thing. And something that I find interesting, something that I think is a path that I might want to go down, is the idea of feelings and emotions, and helping people to get in touch with their feelings, to listen to their feelings more, to be more aware of their feelings. And when I say feelings, I don't just mean emotions, but I also mean the physical feelings in their body. So often when we have some strong emotion, there are feelings that come along with it. There are physical feelings there. And those can be really interesting and important sort of markers to help us figure out what's going on, to help us learn more about our body and our mind, the way that we feel about things, our emotions, our opinions, our thoughts, our beliefs, our values. They let us know what's going on and how we relate to them and react to them. And that's super useful. So that's something that I'm quite passionate about and quite interested in. And there are some forms of therapy that kind of focus a bit more on those kinds of things. things that that relate to emotions and feelings in different ways, and accessing those emotions, giving those emotions a voice, focusing on the feelings of them, perhaps kind of being mindful of them, meditating on them, stuff like that. Just learning to listen to ourselves and accept our feelings. Very interesting, and I like that. Some forms of therapy like Gestalt therapy, which is very much about being sort of in the moment, being very genuine and experiencing things as a whole. That's kind of interesting to me. Fritz Perls, the guy who was kind of spearheading Gestalt, I guess, kind of came up with it. A bit of a dick. Not a super fan of him and his approach to things. You can see there's this old psychology video. This shows off different counselling styles. It's called the Gloria tapes, because there's a woman called Gloria who went and saw 3 different kinds of therapists and had a little videotape session with them. A very brave woman, really incredible. And Carl Rogers, the guy who did the person-centered therapy and came up with those 4 qualities and conditions, he is one of the guys who Gloria saw, and that video is very popular and is actually the thing that got me into wanting to become a counsellor. I was sort of talking through that with my own therapist, and he showed me that video, and I was like, oh, you know what, I think I could do that. I think I could be good at that. That's interesting. And so I watched that, and he is fantastic. He's really interesting. He's very, very kind of passive. And a lot of times I think people watch him and they just wish that he'd ask a question. And it's interesting. So I mean, he sort of takes the person-centered approach to an extreme in some sense, but very interesting to watch, certainly. Fritz Perls, another one of the guys that Gloria sees. Not a huge fan of him. He's a bit of a bully. I haven't rewatched it since I started actually studying counselling, but my initial impression of him, at least, was not a positive one. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Gestalt is bad. I think that there's a lot of Gestalt therapists who aren't actually big fans of Fritz Perls. So yeah, it's interesting, certainly. But I'd like to look into Gestalt a bit more, but I don't know that much about it, admittedly. But there are some very interesting ones. Somatic therapy, so that's sort of body-focused therapy. That's quite big on the bodily feelings of emotions and things like that. Also body work, doing things like dancing, yoga, physical exercises, things like that. And that might be interesting. That might be interesting to look into. There are sort of subsets of that, or different combinations of different therapy styles that do different things, that work in some Gestalt, some somatic, some other stuff as well. Things called the Hakomi method, things called focusing, all sorts of stuff really. But yeah, I think bodily feelings seem interesting to me, and I'd like to look into that more. Some existential therapy is interesting. Existential therapy deals with the kind of existential givens, the aspects of reality that we don't get to choose. We're just kind of born into a world where this stuff happens to us. So we don't get to choose that people live and die. we don't get to choose the fact that eventually we will die, and things like that. We don't get to choose that we're born into a certain family. We don't get to choose that we're born in a certain country. Our appearance. We don't get to choose our appearance. We can, to some degree, change our appearance, but largely we're stuck with how we look. And yeah, embracing those things can be difficult. There are things that can make us quite unhappy. There are things that can make us quite uncomfortable. And so coming to terms with our existence, with the limitations of it, with the things that we don't get to choose can be tricky for people. So existential therapy can be a really interesting approach as well. It doesn't have any techniques. It's just about talking through these issues, helping people come to terms with life, with death, with hope, with purpose, with meaninglessness, with freedom of choice, all sorts of stuff. Particularly people who are having an existential crisis, so people typically who are like teenagers, early 20s, or people who are in their midlife crisis, or people who are quite old and who may be confronting their mortality and things like that. But yeah, existential therapy is very interesting too. And I'm not really sure what kind of mode I might want. I think really I'm not going to pick just one, and I think I will take a pluralistic approach, which is not everyone needs the same thing. There's not just a one size fits all approach. So different people need different things, and different kinds of therapy, different theories will help different people. And also there's a more sort of esoteric attitude towards things, a sort of combining of lots of different theories or techniques or standpoints, different approaches, and mixing and matching different ones. I think is quite useful too. So I think that I'm more than likely going to combine a bunch of different things, and part of it will be person-centered, which is often the case with therapy nowadays. Even if you don't really subscribe to the belief systems of person-centered therapy and stuff like that, usually you will still use some elements of the Rogerian model that Carl Rogers advocated. And you'll incorporate the active listening skills, and you'll incorporate the congruence and the unconditional positive regard and things like that. So yeah, there's lots of different techniques, but they all kind of share these things, these elements. And in fact, they've done lots and lots of studies, and they've found that really there isn't one form of therapy that works better than others. There's lots of different approaches, and they all kind of work mostly. Maybe there's some that are crappy, but the generally accepted ones, they all work. And people have found that there are these common factors to all therapies, basically, that makes them work. So it doesn't really matter what method, what modality, what theory you use. Obviously, different ones can work for different people, but it's typically more about the relationship with the counselor, the idea that the client has hope, that they believe that they can change. That's a big one. The likelihood of therapy being successful is very, very low if the client doesn't believe that they can change. If they don't think that therapy will work, then it won't work. But if they do think it works, then it'll probably work. But it's not a placebo effect. I mean, partially there is a placebo effect to it, but it's more just having hope and feeling like, yeah, there is the potential that things will get better. So having hope is huge. The relationship between the client and the counselor, that's a big one. And building rapport and things like that, building a kind of shared understanding, and you're working well together. That's a really big one. So a lot of the active listening skills are about rapport building as well. And yeah, having the ability to make changes in your life and finding your own self-efficacy and stuff. That's really, really important. And a lot of the time, that doesn't happen in the therapy room. It happens in the person's real life. happens in their everyday life, their ability to do their homework, so to speak, or to take what they've talked about in therapy and try and apply it to the real world, to their everyday life. So that is one of the biggest factors in the success of therapy. You talk in the therapy room about things and try and help the client to come to terms with things, to adjust the way of thinking, to take different approaches, or to recognize the different kinds of things they could do, but they need to do it outside of the therapy room. And that's not under your control as a therapist. So that's, that's kind of interesting, right? And sort of recognizing the limitations of you and what you can do. It's interesting, certainly. But, I don't know. I haven't settled on my modalities or anything yet. I haven't even had, a proper experience in being a counselor and really trying it out, because I've just had some, short 5, 10, 20 minute practice sessions with other counseling students. But eventually I will have placements where I will be at some kind of counseling agency. I'm not sure where yet. I'm not sure what kind of one I will want to apply for, but I'll get some actual work experience. I'll get some practice in and see what things are like, and that'll be really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to that. I think previously I would have been very anxious about that, but I'm not. Partially because it feels quite different, like quite far away. I guess it's not really a thing that I need to worry about right now. But also I'm confident in my abilities and I'm excited about it. I think it's interesting. I'm looking forward to having the ability to do that. So that's really nice. We're almost done with this picture, actually. I'm colouring in the sun now, of course, a cartoony yellow. I'm probably not going to give him sunglasses because this is before sunglasses were a thing, and also he's the sun, so unless he's looking at a mirror, he doesn't need sunglasses. I don't know why I'm gendering the sun. The sun doesn't need a gender. Maybe it does. I guess suns are typically male, but usually a different vowel. Interesting. Yeah, I've kind of screwed up the grass here. I don't really like the way this looks, but whatever. Is there anything else that I want to say about counselling? Obviously, yes, and I will have many, many, many opportunities to talk about it, and I will make lots of audios about it, I'm sure. But for the moment, I think that's a pretty decent introduction to counselling and the sort of general approach to it, and the techniques used and things like that. I had some interesting feedback from people, the other sort of counselling students, telling me that they liked my approach, and one of them said that I was very sort of no bullshit and was willing to call people on stuff, which is interesting because I try and be like fairly gentle, but I guess I do sometimes ask some sort of maybe more probing questions to try and get people to challenge thoughts or beliefs that they have and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of what they meant, and just sort of not shying away from issues or problems or being willing to talk about whatever. But that's it's interesting, certainly, and I think I'm looking forward to being a counsellor, I think, or at least developing these skills more and sort of seeing where they take me and where else I could potentially apply them. But I think at least for a while, I'd like to be a counsellor. I don't really know what kind of areas I want to work with. I think I want to work with queer people, LGBTQA plus kind of areas. I think that'd be interesting. I'm cis male, so there may be some issues there with people not feeling super comfortable talking to me about gender stuff. I don't know, but hopefully they would. I think I want to work with like depression, maybe anxiety sort of stuff as well. Maybe like abuse, trauma kind of stuff. I haven't taken. There's like an elective you can take on trauma and abuse, and I think I'll probably try and do that. I kind of want to do like all the electives, but I can only do 2 of them. There's one on like alcohol and drugs. There's one on like family stuff. There's one on narrative therapy, which sounds interesting. There's one on different forms of like art therapy, like sculpture and drawing and stuff. Doing a bit of that now with colouring in. There's all sorts of stuff, and they sound really interesting, and I would like to do a great many of them. And then also the if I want to do like a master's or something, there's potentially other topics like hypnosis, which I kind of seemed like a bit bullshit before, but now that I've looked into it and understand what it actually is, it seems like it could be actually quite helpful, and I'd probably be quite good at it because I know how to use my voice, and I can be quite relaxing and safe for people. It's not the kind of stage magician cluck like a chicken stuff. It's more just like putting someone into a more suggestible state and telling them the kinds of things that they benefit from hearing, and kind of helping them to incorporate new ways of thinking and new attitudes and approaches towards how they usually think. Which is kind of interesting. It seems a little cheaty in some ways, I guess. Like you're kind of shortcutting into someone's brain, and there's positives and negatives with that too. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. But it's basically just lots and lots of different stuff to explore, which is nice. And I think that is a nice thing to look forward to. And I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful about it, and I'm passionate about it. Certainly, I've had plenty of ups and downs, and times where I'm not really feeling it, and I don't really want to work on things. I'm getting very procrastinating, and blah 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 blah. And I certainly don't love the constant stream of assignments. And the terms are very short, which is kind of nice and kind of not so nice because they're very intense. But it's interesting, certainly. But I think, even if I dropped out or I stopped doing it or something, just having learned the things that I have learned now is really great and really interesting, and it's been a positive experience. So, yeah, it's really nice. I think we're pretty much done with this picture. I don't love the hills, and the sky is very, very pale, but that's okay. I think we did all right. Didn't really comment on what I was doing so much because I just couldn't shut up about counselling, but I'm passionate about it, and it's nice. And hopefully you are now aware of the value of talking non-stop about something for like an hour and a half. So yeah, it is important. I think it's therapeutic, certainly, and yeah, we all want to be heard. We all want to be understood. And it's nice to share my passion about counselling. Anyway, this was nice. Bit of a different one, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you might have learned something. Until next time, bye-bye.